All right, so I have a shout out for one of my students from last semester, Esther Ray, who sent this article to me, and it was one of the most enjoyable articles I've read in a long time. Very, very topical. It is an original contribution that appeared in Injury Epidemiology, a journal I'm sure, Matt, you subscribe to on a regular basis.
I read it every day. I'm also featured in it.
Ryder Lystad and Benjamin T. Brown, and the title is Death is Certain, the Time is Not. Mortality and Survival in Game of Thrones.
Ooh, yeah.
So what they did, these two authors went out and bought the full 7-season DVD compilation of Game of Thrones without the last episodes. They don't know what happened with the last episode, and I'm sure all of our listeners know exactly what happened in the last episode.
I don't.
They went through all of those episodes, and they counted everybody that died.
So it's like a giant survival analysis?
Game of Thrones. They did a survival analysis, and they looked at a whole bunch of risk factors for death in Game of Thrones. And basically, they came up with a number of characteristics that predicted death. So of 330 characters that were included, 56% died by the end of the study period. All but 2 deaths were due to injury, burns, and poisoning. And what they did very clever, they went through all of the deaths and ascribed an ICD-9-10 code.
Oh, that's awesome.
No.
And they have a table that takes up 2 pages with the ICD-9 codes of things like open wound of head, SO1, intracranial injury, burns of multiple body regions, assault by drugs, medications, biological substances, place or occurrence, prison, home, military camp, street and highway, trade and service area. Then what they did is they looked at what predicted death among the characters in Game of Thrones, and the survival time ranged from 11 seconds after introduction of the character to 57 hours, with the median survival time estimated to be 28 hours. And that is of running time of the series, not of like real Game of Thrones time.
Oh, I see. I was going to ask how they coded person time.
The probability of surviving at least 1 hour in the show was 86%. The analyses revealed worse survival for characters who were male,
that makes
who
sense.
were low-born, and who had not switched allegiance during the show, or who had featured more prominently in the show. And they went through this analysis where they have social status, highborn, lowborn, type of occupation, which they stratified to a silk collar occupation or a boiled leather collar occupation. So the silk collar were like priests and educators.
They must have had a union, those leather collar guys.
I imagine that they did. And then they stratified it also by religion. And unfortunately, if you were a member of Faith of the Seven, your likelihood of dying was much higher than if you were a member of the Great Stallion or Lord of Light religions, as well as the last known allegiance. And apparently, can you guess which allegiance conferred the greatest likelihood of death? Matt, you haven't really watched this show, but
Never seen the show.
Anyway, if you were a Targaryen, you had the next to lowest level, or a Greyjoy, you had next to the lowest level. But if you were a member of the Stark clan, if your allegiance was with the Starks, you had over 10% likelihood of dying in the show. And if it switched during the show, you had a 45% chance of dying if your allegiance did not switch.
Wow.
Why do we not think of things like this?
That is so clever.
I really want to be a member of the boiled leather collar
I
workers union.
on this podcast,
is a great
you are,
paper.
Don. On this podcast, you are.
So
Well,
wait,
that's
so wait
the
a
end
minute.
of our-
Wait.
Oh,
I
that
want
is
to get
not
back to
the
the
end of our-
ICD-9, the ICD-10 codes, because we earlier on in the series we learned about being hit by ducks as a new ICD-10 code, and I'm wondering if there's like a code for like incinerated by dragon. Or boiled in oil or things like that.
No, bitten or struck by dog, bitten or struck by other mammal.
That would
There's
be
nothing
other.
in here.
Are dragons
duck.
mammals?
No, they're not.
Are
They're I'm sure they're reptiles.
Okay, but they're hot-blooded. Yeah.
There's an ICD-9 code for legal execution. Did you know that? Asphyxiation, maltreatment syndromes. Either ill-defined or
Wow.
unspecified causes of mortality. Apparently nobody dies of old age in Game of Thrones.
Oh, no, it's too, they've got too much to do. That is awesome, Don. Thank you for, I think
was
you win the prize on
excellent.
that
That is
one.
so cool.
That's great.
So cool.
Okay, so I found a paper in one of the Christmas editions of the BMJ.
We love the Christmas
one-
edition.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. So this one was in 2015. So this is by Carl Maynard Geisinger and colleagues. So hopefully I pronounced that right. This is a study on doctors' coffee purchasing patterns while at work. So I thought this was really interesting. So essentially they used the data from the hospital. This is the large teaching hospital in Switzerland. And they used data from the electronic payment system of when doctors purchased coffee from the hospital cafeteria. So of course, this doesn't account for coffee that you consume at home or from other sources, but they say that most people use this electronic payment system within the hospital because they have a really large staff discount of 45%. So they think this captures probably most coffee purchases that doctors make during the day. And they compare doctors across different specialties. So for example, surgery versus neurology, radiology, et cetera. And they found that, so they looked at the data across a full year, and they found overall 84% of doctors purchased coffee at one or more of the hospital cafeterias. And overall, over 70,000, almost 71,000 coffees were consumed in 2014 by doctors, which
It's a lot of coffee.
seemed like a lot, especially since I think the N here was 766 doctors total. So,
Although, given how long the hours that doctors work, maybe I think I want them.
well, yeah,
Consuming a lot
interestingly,
of
I
coffee.
think they only were able to measure, I think maybe the cafeteria was only open for daytime most of the day, but they were not able to measure actually overnight coffee. And they did say that some doctors also have their own coffee machines in their offices. So we're definitely underestimating here. So that is, yes, I agree. We probably want people drinking coffee. So they found that orthopedic surgeons were the biggest coffee drinkers, at least according to this data. So they had an average of 189 coffees per year, followed by radiologists at 177, and then general surgeons. So I thought it was fun. They had some funny lines on why they think this might be. So they say in the discussion, we tried to settle the debate as to whether surgeons, radiologists, or physicians drink more coffee. We believe we have finally clarified this important question, unresolved for so
Very
many
important
years.
question. Yep.
It is, in fact, the orthopedic surgeons who drink the most coffee, which suggests either that their work hard, play hard, drink hard persona extends to the hospital canteens, highlighting their productivity, or that they have too much time to kill and can be found hanging out in cafeterias, which do you think
it is?
Unlikely. I think it's probably the former. I don't know. Or maybe they're making more money and they have more money that they can spend on coffee. Also, interestingly, they found that the more senior doctors seemed to buy more coffee than the more junior doctors. And they also did something interesting where they used the data to look at how many people would buy multiple coffees, assuming that they would bring them back for other people, and found that senior doctors were more likely to do this, which is heartening. So hopefully they were going to share them with others who were more junior, which is kind of the opposite of what I might think watching like Grey's Anatomy, when they always make like the medical interns go get the coffee.
And Grey's Anatomy is a documentary.
Of course. Yeah. Let me see. There was one other funny thing. Oh, the older doctors consumed more coffee too. And they said increased coffee intake might help fight age and fatigue to keep up with the younger workforce.
That is...
Another popular opinion repeatedly expressed to the authors during daily qualitative groundwork for this study is that senior doctors have more time to socialize and network. And finally, they excluded cheap instant coffee from vending machines for this
Obviously.
analysis.
Because it's
They
not
say-
coffee.
That's what they said, yeah. Although these beverages do contain caffeine, we believe this brew does not merit the name coffee.
So true.
So I thought that was
is
pretty
so true.
funny.
Oh, that's really good. Okay, so I have a question. If we were to repeat this study in a school of public health, which department, who consumes the most coffee? What's your guess?
I don't know. Oh, maybe it's the department's in Crosstown because you have a coffee place in the building. We have to venture out. If we're
No, see
if
now
we're
you're going
purchasing
by
coffee.
you're going by coffee. I'm meaning by profession. All schools of public health.
I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. For some reason, I think
I'm saying epi because we best understand the health benefits of coffee.
I for some reason think it's the biostatisticians. Don't know why.
Really?
Yep. Anyway,
I think departments that with more Europeans would have, right? I mean, I think this was in Switzerland. I'm imagining their coffee consumption is probably higher than ours.
Okay,
Don't you
so-
think?
They did say something about that.
so
Did they? Okay.
the chair of the biostats department is a listener. So Jose, if you're listening, let us know whether or not you think that I'm right that the biostats department consumes more coffee than any other in the School of Public Health. All right.
It's summertime. And that means
sure
people
is.
are going to the beach. And what is going on at the beach these days, guys?
Well,
Cape Cod?
Sharks.
Yes.
Sharks.
Yes.
Lots of them.
Lots of them. So
Because
no fun at
we
the
have
beach.
lots of seals.
Yes. Do you have the North Atlantic Shark app on your iPhone yet?
No.
So cool. It shows you where the great whites have been spotted.
Okay, hold on.
It
I'm
is
downloading as we
so
speak.
Cool. It is so cool. Anyway, it's a little bit chilling. You basically don't want to go in the water at all.
Is it Shark Week yet?
Every week is Shark Week at Brewster.
Can I tell you? I gave a talk a couple weeks ago in which I used a slide of a shark as a kind of a metaphor, and then you know how they have those like little text that you can put on the top of a slide.
Yeah.
And I put the dates for Shark Week in there and asked if anyone wanted to watch with me, and I got only two people in the audience of roughly 100 who came and said something to me that they actually noticed my little joke.
You didn't
there.
talk about Sharknado, did you?
No.
It's a very good movie.
Oh, it's an excellent movie.
Sharknado.
It's up there
excellent.
with snakes on the plane.
Yeah. Anyway, sharks.
Right. So this is a paper that I found and I was like, Don Thea's gonna love this one because it's like useless science done really well.
That is his wheelhouse.
This is yours. Anyway, so the deal is that there was this guy in September of 1994 who was a surfer dude, and he was surfing off of the beach in Flagler Beach in Flagler County, Florida. So don't go
Say
there,
that
guys.
3 times fast.
Flagler, Florida. Anyway, he was on his paddling away on his surfboard, having a good old time when he got chomped on his foot. And this was like a minor bite by. It was obviously a shark, but he didn't. It was his foot, so he was looking one way, and the shark bit him on the foot and let go and swam off, and he didn't know what it was. So he paddled in and got some minor sutures and was back to surfing and being a dude. Before you could say boo, he was not put off by this in the least. But the thing is that 10 years later, a fragment of the tooth migrated out of his foot because, often when sharks bite, the teeth are very brittle and they will fragment inside the host. And so he took this little fragment, took it to his friend and says, "Can you tell what kind of shark was this?" Because he was curious. And the friend, who was like a shark expert, said it was too broken up and he couldn't really tell. But then another 10 years later, a second piece of this shark tooth migrated out of his foot. And this time he took it to his friend, who is a molecular biologist, and they sequenced the mitochondrial genome.
Now, that's a good friend.
And it was a black tip shark.
It was a black
tip shark,
Really?
Carcharinus lombatus.
Absolutely
So now he
fascinating.
knows.
Wow, that is pretty cool.
So when someone say, "What's eating you?" you can say
black tip
Carcharinus
shark.
lombatus.
Oh,
I thought
that was
it changes absolutely nothing.
great.
But I'm with him. I would have wanted to know. Anyway,
changes.
this was in the Journal of Wilderness and Environmental Medicine. If you want to read it, 2019. Lead author was Lei Yang, PhD. Who apparently has not enough to do.
All right. Well, for mine,
Yours has a lot of formulas on it.
as you
I can see it over
as you
there.
guys know, I treat this podcast as my form of therapy. So I just work through my issues.
You have a magnet about that?
I do. It's on my fridge. In particular, I find there are a lot of things that somehow I just missed in life, and I'm guessing you guys might have already known this, but I was at home the other day working on a manuscript, and suddenly it popped into my head the fact that when I was a kid, we used to go to the circus every year when the circus would come into town.
Ringling and Brothers and Barnum and Bailey.
Yep. And the clowns drive in the clown car, and suddenly they open the door and 50 clowns come out of the same car.
Mm-hmm.
My assumption as a kid had always been there was a trapdoor in the floor and that's how they got that many people.
It's a TARDIS.
What?
It's a TARDIS.
Oh, that's a Harry Potter reference,
Doctor
right?
Who.
Oh, sorry, Doctor Who. I was close. No, It is not. But do you know how they do it?
No.
So now I feel a little better.
Russian clowns,
I
like
thought
Russian
they
dolls?
were all really in there.
So that is the answer to the question. They are all really in there. So I looked up this article on the physics of clown cars by John Perley Huffman, published in 2011, in which he interviewed the executive director of the International Clown Car Hall of Fame and Research Center, which is apparently a real thing, who says there is no trick to the clown car gag. What they do is they take a fully functioning car and they remove the entire interior of the car. So including the door panels, the headliner, and then they paint the windows except for a small slot for the driver to be able to see through. The driver sits on a milk crate, and then they beef up the springs a little bit so that it doesn't sag down onto the wheels. And so this gentleman went ahead and did the math. Now, I think most of us know that an American standard clown stands at 5 feet, 8 inches and weighs 158 pounds.
So that's one clown unit.
That's according to the
Standard clown units.
Yes. The offices of circus, zoos, and carnivals, that is, or possibly Wikipedia. And each clown occupies 3 cubic feet, assuming 15-inch width and 5-inch thickness. And the typical 2011 Ford Focus sedan has got 93.1 cubic feet. The trunk has 13.8 cubic feet. So theoretically, you could get 40 clowns to fit into a Focus. Wow. Now, if you want to get more sophisticated, though, there is an actual formula to use, and apparently the number of clowns you can get in a car depends on a mix of the clown politics, clown size, clown flexibility, clown survivability, and the critical maximum clown hilarity quotient. And he works out all these formulas. But in layperson's terms, as he said, this boils down to somewhere between 14 and 21 clowns with their props in the typical clown car.
That is so cool.
I just thought you all needed to know that.
That is really cool. I love that.
I was shocked to find out that they were all really in there. That kind of.
Do you know also, Matt, since we're on the subject of clowns, not that just that they're creepy, but
They are.
but which they are, but that if you wear clown shoes, you don't have to clip your toenails ever anymore.
I did not know that.
Because they just kind of curl up.
Really good point.
Eventually, they fill up the entire shoe.
Can I tell you that is gross? Can I tell you that when I was in high
that's why they're so long.
When I was in high school, I had a friend who went off and got a degree from the Ringling Brothers Clown College in Minneapolis, Minnesota, somewhere. I then went off to college and met a guy who already had been to clown college with the same guy that I knew from high school. So I know 2 people who got degrees from clown college. I think that says more about me.
How's it going for them?
Anything. You know, one of them is actually, to this day, a clown who is part of Clowns Without Borders. That is a thing.
Is that a real thing?
That is a real thing. He's been to Sudan and a lot of different war-torn areas. Anyway, that is
creep out kids around the world.
That's my story on clown. I will make no comments. I actually think it would be a little traumatizing if you'd been through a lot of trauma to then see a clown, but I guess it works out really well.
If you're doing the balloon toys things, you have to do Bactrian camels with 2 humps. It's much more challenging.
Good point.
Here's a question I know you've always been wondering about. What is the biological function of male facial hair?
I feel like it's got to be to make us more attractive.
That very well could be. Especially now in the pandemic. I feel like everyone on Zoom is sporting some facial hair.
I can't see Chris's current bearded state. Chris, where are you?
Yeah, I'm hirsute these days. Hirsute.
So there are 3 of us on this call. Yeah, 3 men on this call, and we all are bearded.
Yeah.
So this is very appropriate. So this was a paper that was published in a journal called, it's a biology journal. All right, let's see, a biology journal that I'll give you the title: Impact Protection Potential of Mammalian Hair, Testing the Pugilism Hypothesis for the Evolution of Facial Hair. So basically what the authors are suggesting in this biology journal is that the role of male facial hair was to absorb punches.
I like it.
So that the furrier your face was, the more likely you were able to sustain a facial beating from another male person.
Aren't there people who have those annoying, like, sort of artsy, hipster, facial hair that just makes you want to punch them?
Maybe yes. They weren't looking at it as the rationale for the aggressive behavior, but it's interesting. So they talk through how when people fight, they tend to punch people in the face, and this was like the root of their core hypothesis that maybe the mandible, they say, when superficially covered by the beard, is the most commonly fractured facial bone in interpersonal violence, and so they hypothesize that the beards protect the skin and bones when men fight by absorbing and dispersing the energy of a blunt impact. So what they did, they did an experiment, okay? They made a fiber epoxy composite as like a bone, analog, and then covered it, okay, in 3 different formats. Okay, one that was covered with skin that had thick hair, the furry model. Okay, skin that had no hair, the sheared or the plucked model, and then they did a sheared one and then a plucked one. Okay, so they had 3 variants of this facial, this facial model. Okay, and then they used they call it a drop weight impact tester affixed with a loaded cell and they basically punched it and went to see how much force it could absorb. Okay, and so they took this model, they punched it over and over at different velocities, and then went to see, and then looked to see what happened. And they did 20 punches in each, the furry, the plucked, and the sheared condition. And they found that it was true that the fully furry samples were capable of absorbing more energy than the plucked and the sheared samples, okay? Wow. And it was statistically significant in their analysis. And anyway, so this supports the hypothesis. Wow. They claim that human beards protect the vulnerable regions of the face from damaging blows.
What about what, Chris?
Goatees.
Yeah.
Punch to the mouth only.
Because I think you'd also have to look at the probability of being punched score as well as the impact of punch.
It's I don't know. And also, there's, people get punched in the nose a lot too, but there's, I don't know if that's like nostril hair.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Is explaining that.
Ooh,
right.
The nose beard. We need a nose beard.
Right. So anyway, a little intriguing scientific tidbit.
Now I know I have this beard.
Right. Stay safe.
Stay safe out there.
So I'm going to talk about memories.
You want me to sing?
I was hoping someone would offer. Can you? Yeah.
Did you see Cats?
Oh my God. Better than seeing Cats is reading the reviews of Cats.
Yeah. So I did, I saw it as a kid. And then when it came through Boston maybe even a year ago now, I took my daughter to see it. And I will say, I don't know that it's aged particularly well, like the leg warmers and spandex and everything. But when Memories, it did give me chills. The woman's voice was amazing.
But you haven't seen the movie, which is what everyone is disturbed by.
Yeah, I'm not going to see the movie.
My favorite review of the movie was, it said, I preface this with the fact that I'm not a cat person. After seeing this movie, I'm not sure I'm a movie person.
That's great. No, I won't be seeing the movie. But this story is not about cats. It's about flatworms and mollusks.
Oh, cool. Not nearly
which I prefer, I think, to cats.
Right. I like cats.
So this is an article that appeared on the online magazine Nautilus. It was posted back on December 13th. The textbook wisdom is that memories are stored in synapses. And this is one of those things that I just assumed that we would know much more about this than we actually do.
I would have assumed too.
But there's this very interesting, what was his background? He was a psychology professor at the University of Michigan way back in the 50s, James McConnell. And he had done all of this research on these freshwater flatworms called planaria. And the reason he studied them, 2 reasons. First of all, they have a true synaptic nervous system, so that makes them interesting for a worm. But they also have these amazing abilities to regenerate. So you can apparently chop up these worms into 50 pieces, and all 50 pieces will become complete, fully functioning organisms again. Isn't that amazing?
So cool.
Yeah. So
I remember doing this in high school biology, by the way.
Chopping up worms?
chopping up planaria. Yeah.
Oh,
And
really?
watching them regenerate. It was so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it took like a week or so, but they totally did it.
So, okay, so this leads to, so when let's say you chop one of those little guys in half and you've trained the full worm to do something. So,
Wait, you can train a worm to do something?
Absolutely.
so this guy trained them, the early experiments were getting them, it involved some shocking. So he was trying to get them to associate light with getting a little electric shock. And sure enough, he was able to do that. So he had these trained worms, and then he would chop them in half. And the head end, not surprisingly, would retain its training. But when the tail end grew ahead, it also knew
wow.
to associate light with being
No.
shot. Yes.
That is super
So that
cool.
was this first kind of clue into maybe your memories aren't stored in the synapses.
Maybe
They're
they're in your
stored in
tail.
some other way. Well, and then there was this Swedish neurobiologist, Holger Heiden. He had suggested way back in the 1960s that memories were actually stored in the RNA of neuron cells. So, in response to this idea, this McConnell from Michigan took advantage of the fact that these flatworms are actually cannibals, and he chopped up some trained worms and fed them to untrained worms. And sure enough, they too knew to recoil in response to the light, and even would retain training to things like getting through a maze, much more complicated tasks.
And I assume he checked beforehand that they didn't have this experience.
Correct.
That
Yeah.
They didn't
They
have
don't
this
go into all the
reaction
controls
before,
here, but-
then he feeds them the worm, and then whoa.
So
Crazy,
this is
right?
like that show Heroes and that evil villain Skylar who would eat all the victims with and then would absorb their abilities.
Clearly the idea came from this,
is so
obviously.
cool.
Yeah. So, but this guy retired so first of all, he tended to self-publish his work. So he had his own journal called The Worm Runner's Digest.
Yep.
And in addition to his research studies, he also published some sci-fi humor and cartoons in there. So it wasn't all taken super seriously. He retired in 1988, and then this kind of fizzled until recently.
So this is not new
No,
information. Wow.
he was doing all this like in the 50s and 60s. So a couple of people have now picked up on this. So I'll just give you one example. So David Glanzman is a neurobiologist at the University of California, Los Angeles, and he works with a mollusk called Aplysia. Anyway, it's basically
delicious.
a big inky sea slug, but it has a very simple nervous system. And he was shocking these mollusks to train them to sustain this reflex that they have, which is basically they have what they call a siphon. It's this little breathing tube between the gill and the tail. And he wanted it to extend that reflex to withdraw the siphon when it was touched. So basically, they would train them to do this. They would notice that during the training process, there would be all this new growth in the synapse. He would then destroy that synaptic growth. They would then have unlearned this behavior. So consistent with the idea that the memory is stored in the synapses. But then they would retrain them and notice new growth there. And then the snails behaved once again as if they knew how to respond to that stimuli. So it didn't seem like it was really stored in the old synapses. It was something that remained there. So he's also buying into this idea that it's really stored in the RNA. So they actually extracted RNA from these synaptic regions, destroyed the synapse, then injected this RNA into untrained mollusks.
Mollusks, yeah.
And sure enough, the ones who had been injected with RNA from a trained mollusk were able to show this behavior, whereas the ones with RNA from untrained did not. And so this is really cool because it changes the paradigm about memory, but also they are optimistic that it could have some sort of health implications for folks with dementia or memory loss.
Wow, cool.
So in the future, I wouldn't have to learn calculus. I could just have it injected.
Yes, that's right.
That is so cool. That is super cool. I am really impressed.
All right, I have a new hero.
Is it Quintilian?
Okay.
No, it's not.
Is it
No,
Julius Caesar?
Quasimodo?
Nick, would you turn off his mic, please?
Possibly Ovid?
Are you done?
Yes.
All right, so I have a new hero. And his name is Andre Geim.
Okay, Andre.
He is a Dutch scientist who works in the Netherlands, and he has the singular distinction of having won both an Ig Nobel Award and a Nobel Prize.
Oh,
No
wow.
way. That's
Imagine
impressive.
Double dipping.
Imagine
No
that.
fair.
So he has this totally refreshing approach to science where he and his lab team have instituted a Friday night experiments where they are encouraged to go into the laboratory and do something completely unrelated to what it is that they are studying. And as a result of these Friday nights experimentation in the lab, his perspective is that it's better to be wrong than to be boring. So he encourages these people to sort of follow their nose. And there have been many attempts, but 3 major discoveries that have come out of these Friday night experiments. The first one was the one for which he won the Ig Nobel Prize. And what he decided to do was to try to figure out whether a very, very powerful magnet has an effect on things that we ordinarily don't consider to have a charge. And so he was able to sort of drop water droplets through this very powerful magnet and suspend those water droplets in midair to have this anti-gravitating, levitating effect. But what he was known for, and what he got the Ig Nobel Prize for, was he did the same thing with a live frog.
Oh,
So he was able to levitate a live frog in this magnet for an indefinite period of time. And they've got a video of it, and it's the most remarkable thing to see. You see this live frog suspended in air, kind of flailing about in various different ways.
Trying to figure out what the heck is going on.
Right. And then the second discovery out of this group was that they were able to figure out and replicate how gecko foot pads work, which are a remarkable construction of nature because they have this incredible adhesive power and they have like no sticky stuff on their pads. And it's like,
so how do they do it?
Super Velcro. Well, when you take an electron microscope and you bore down on the foot pads of a gecko, you see these what they call stellae, which are like little fingers that crop up. And if you focus down on the tips of those stellae, there are yet another set of stellae and another set of stellae until you get this incredible surface area on the foot pads of these geckos, so that when they come in contact with an extremely smooth surface, I mean, they can walk up mirrors, that the surface area that's in contact with the surface actually takes advantage of van der Waals forces. So these intermolecular forces that, when taken together over all of this huge amount of surface area, actually bonds the foot pads of the gecko to the surface. And then they're very easy to break because all you have to do is sort of twist it to the side a little bit, and it can then then dislodge. And so he made tape that has these properties. And there's this whole new area of science that is looking at how to sort of commercialize these properties, to the extent where eventually the thought is that there will be sneakers that will be
anti-gravity boots
that'll allow you to walk up a wall, any wall.
Yes,
it's absolutely amazing. But the third thing that came out of these Friday night experiment nights, for which he won the Nobel Prize, was the discovery of graphene. And graphene is a form of carbon that is 1 atom thick, but has incredible strength, so that if you were to take a graphene monolayer and put it over a pail and have the weight of a truck bearing down on the graphene surface area of the point of a pencil, the graphene would be able to withstand that pressure. In addition, it's quite close to being a not super conductor, but a very incredible conductor, electrical conductor. And the way they discovered this was that they wanted to take some carbon and to make a graphene monolayer, and they ground down a piece of carbon to the point where it was just dust, and they kept failing. But they had Scotch tape that was in contact with this dust, and they kept throwing it into the garbage pail. And then they realized that if you take Scotch tape and you apply it to a source of carbon and you tear it off, you essentially are creating a one-atom monolayer of carbon, and that's the graphene. And
That's so cool.
That's what he won the Nobel Prize for.
Wow.
And his team submitted a paper summarizing their findings in Nature. The journal rejected it twice, which is such a common fate for historically path-breaking ideas that it could signal an unintended compliment. One referee said that it did not constitute a sufficient scientific advance, which was cited later by Geim in his Nobel Prize award-winning speech, which he called a random walk to graphene.
That is fantastic.
That is so
amazing?
cool. That is so cool. And it actually is quite inspirational too.
Yeah, he's my new hero. He's really
Mine. I think he's mine too.
he has a complete sense of humor about this.
Can I ask more about the geckos and their amazing footprints? So the way you were describing it almost sounded like a fractal. Is that an appropriate descriptor?
Not in what I've read. I'm not sure how you would really bind the two together. You know, it's really a matter of having an almost infinite amount of surface area and contact between the two forces, such that these extremely weak intermolecular forces actually have a lot of sort of cumulative force that keeps the pad of the gecko foot in contact and adhesive to whatever surface it is.
Yeah. It's an amazing,
cool.
Amazing observation.
Yeah.
So you guys have known me a long time, and you know that I'm a big fan of swearing.
I have noticed that.
I'm not going to swear on this podcast, but for that you should tune into my Twitter.
just so you know, I prepped Nick, and he had a bleep button ready to go, and I thought pretty much this whole segment was just going to be one long.
I am really doing a good job of controlling myself. So, you guys, okay. I wanted to talk about this interesting study that I found out about one of the benefits of swearing. So, have you heard that swearing helps people tolerate pain?
Oh, I have not heard that, but that is certainly my experience. Well, does it help me tolerate it? I don't know. I don't think I tolerate pain at all, but it is definitely a product of pain.
I've heard that people who swear are smarter.
Oh.
Yes. There is research to show that they actually that they've shown that they have a better mastery of the vocabulary.
Really?
It seems goofy.
That doesn't sound...
Yeah.
No, it's true.
Yeah, okay.
That's actually a fact we can say here on this podcast. That's been proven. A word we love in research.
Yeah. Right. So interestingly, trials have shown that repeating the F word increases our ability to tolerate physical pain. And even more cool is that it helps to decrease psychological pain that we may feel when we're being rejected in a social setting, which is really interesting. Okay, so some researchers who work in what they call the swear lab, which sounds really fun.
I want to be part of the swear lab.
I know, we need that.
I've heard of a swear jar, but... Swear lab. Wow.
Yeah, there are some fun YouTube videos of the swear lab. So they wondered how swearing induces a stress-related pain relief. So they thought, well, maybe swearing alleviates your pain by distracting you, because swear words sound funny and they're somewhat novel, or if they somehow elicit an emotional arousal. That is like how we regulate emotions. They help us regulate emotions. So the researchers thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could create a swear word that has the same pain-reducing qualities, but it isn't offensive? And so they sought to make up a swear word that was both humorous and novel.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So they created 2 swear words I'm going to tell you in a second. So what they did is they had this trial where they asked 92 people to hold their hand in an ice bath. And this is kind of a common thing that people in pain research do to their poor subjects. I actually did it once in a research study. It was in a pain study. Yes, totally.
Yeah,
it really
does. It wouldn't work.
Yeah. And I did an ice bath, and then they cut off my circulation with the cuff, and I had to do all of these tests. That's, when you're seeking money.
I was going to say, why? Who signs up for this? People who swear a lot.
Yeah, I was also in the placebo group of an allergy trial when I was an undergrad. That was the worst experience of my life. It was terrible.
Oh, no.
Anyway. Okay, so 92 people put your hand in the ice bath, and then they look at your pain threshold, which is when you start to feel pain, and your pain tolerance, which is how long you can stand the pain. Each person did this trial 4 times, saying 4 different words each time. So the first word, and they randomized these with people. So one word was solid, which is a neutral word. One word was the F word. And then the 2 words that they made up were fouch.
Fouch?
Like Fauci.
Fouch you, Matt. Fouch.
Nick, are we allowed to say fouch?
Fouch.
Fouch is okay. We got the thumbs up from Nick.
He gives us a thumbs up. Okay. And the other one is twizz pipe.
Ooh, that is disgusting.
That is hard to say.
My ear. My ears.
Twizz pipe?
Oh, you
wow.
guys. Twizz pipe.
You got the mouth of a trucker. No offense to truckers who are probably lovely people, but wow.
That is not easy to say. I like my quizzes easy to say.
You twizz pipe like a sailor.
Yeah, well, one of the things that they did in this swear lab was actually they wrote down a whole bunch of potential
that
swear
must have been the funnest day.
Yeah, and then they said, like, a 1-syllable swear word is probably what we need. Like, those are the best swear words.
Yes, my goodness.
So anyway,
Schnauzer.
So they found in this study that the F word was the only one that helped to increase your pain threshold and your pain tolerance.
Whoa, shut the front door.
Yeah.
Shut the phone up.
And so they said, well, it's not just swearing. The pain alleviation effect of swearing is not just about a distraction, because you could distract yourself kind of by saying any weird word, and that swearing actually holds a lot of social and psychological power. So Fouch you guys.
Fouch you
Wow, I love it. That was awesome. Chris, what do you got?
Nothing nearly as cool as that, but an interesting paper about human nature, published in Nature, I think. No, Science. Sorry, Science Advances. It's the title of the paper is called "Kids These Days: Why the Youth of Today Seem Lacking," by John Protzko and Jonathan Schooler, and they start with this great quote, which was from Thomas Barnes, the minister of St. Margaret's Church in New Fish Street in London in 1624. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to do the accent well enough.
Don't do it.
But he says, this is 1624 quote, "The youth were never more saucy.
Yeah.
The ancient are scorned, the honorable are condemned, and the magistrate is not dreaded."
Kids today.
Kids today.
Boy.
So apparently his point was that, like, we've been scorning the youth of today for a really, really, really long time.
No, this is...
And everybody thinks that the youth of today do not live up to how we was when we was youth.
Every generation thinks this.
Every generation. And so they decide to explore this systematically.
That's
to
cool.
sort of try to understand this. And so they did a series of kind of clever experiments where they surveyed individuals, I think, online, asking them about their attitudes about the youth of today on various dimensions, controlling for characteristics of the respondents. Okay, and so they did these 3 experiments. They actually did 5, but I'm going to talk about the first 3. The first study asked the question, do kids respect their elders as we did back in the good old days? And so to look at this, they surveyed all these individuals about whether they thought the youth of today respect their elders appropriately. And then they also asked them to rate themselves in different ways on a scale of authoritarianism. And so the general result was that across the board, perceptions are that the youth of today do not respect the elderly.
No, they do not.
And we don't know if this is true or not true, just that it is perceived to be true. But what was clear is that the tendency to believe that the youth of today do not respect the elderly is strongly correlated with their the respondents' endorsement of authoritarianism. It's like someone who's very heavy-handed and believes certain presidents should have an absolute dictatorial right to do whatever they want. For example, not talking about our country necessarily, but whatever might tend to be particularly likely to endorse this attitude that the youth today are not respectful. The second question they asked is, are kids less intelligent compared with us? And this was an interesting one because there have been longitudinal studies that show categorically that the average intelligence as measured, imperfectly through intelligence tests is definitely rising in the United States. So like this theory,
but it's like the Will Rogers thing,
right? Exactly. It's not.
Wait, the Will Rogers thing?
Explain.
I'm going to get it wrong on the spot, but basically, when the Okies moved to California, the IQ of both places went up. Isn't that right? Did I get that wrong?
I love that. Is that from like the Grapes of Wrath or something?
No, this is the definition of the Will Rogers phenomenon, right?
I see what you mean. If the two distributions were completely separated and the bottom of one went to the top of the other.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Wow. That's so cool.
Pretty cool.
Well, anyway, so our kids' less intelligence is like background. Yes, they're definitely more intelligent, but the perception is that they are less intelligent, not that they are more. Yes. Anyway, you get the point. So here, in general, most people didn't really believe this was so, which was somewhat charitable. With the exception is that the self-reported increased intelligence of the respondents strongly predicted belief that the youth of today are stupider.
Yeah, there you go.
So you're like, yep. And study number 3 is another good one. Do kids today enjoy reading less than we did when we were kids? And they looked at the authoritarianism of this, and they also did this thing called the author recognition test, which just is a test to say, like, have you heard of T.S. Eliot? Have you heard of Shakespeare? Have you heard of people who wrote books? Not whether they have objectively read them, but that they have heard of them. So sort of like a proxy for like literary consumption, but it's a squishy one, we will stipulate. So again, the perception is that kids definitely do read less and that they enjoy reading less. But this is also predicated on the literacy of the respondents. So the people who rate themselves as highly literate are the most likely to consider kids to be illiterate in terms of the consumption of the great works. And so their basic conclusion was, which is not like our kids, in fact, less respectful, less intelligent and reading less, because we don't have any indices of these except for the intelligence, which is definitely going up, is that most of this behavior about the kid, the beliefs about the kids of the day is based on yourself projected forward, rather than actually any difference in the kids of today versus any time going back to at least the 1620s.
That sounds about right to me. We have many times on this program talked about predatory journals and amusing ways that people have outed predatory journals in the past. And there's one that has been going around Twitter recently that just made me so happy that I had to share it. You guys might have already heard this one. But this was an article published by a gentleman named Daniel Baldesser, I think is how it's pronounced, from the Department of Biological Sciences in SUNY Oswego here in the USA. And he wrote this article to submit to this predatory journal to see if they would, in fact, publish it, despite the fact that there are some I'm going to say there are some telltale signs in it that this is not your average well-written research paper. I'll start with the title. The title of the publication is, "What's the Deal with Birds?" Which, you would think might tip people off that something is not right. So I'll read you a few lines. I'll read you a bunch of lines because there's so many good ones. From the introduction, it starts off, "Birds are very strange. Some people are like, whoa, they're flying around and stuff. What's the deal with that?" So I set out to test the hypothesis by observing several bird species. I watched birds and tried to figure out what they were up to. I predicted that these birds would be pretty wild, but that I might be able to figure out what their deal is. Then in the materials and methods, I looked at 3 different birds, a woodpecker, a parrot, and a penguin. I looked really close at them, squinting and everything, to try and figure out what was up with them. To eliminate potential confounds, I conducted my experiments with only animals that I knew for sure were birds, and no other things like bugs or bats. Then he talks about some of the experiments, and then he says, "That was a lot of work, so I didn't want to do that again." continuing on, to explore the relationship between appearance and weirdness, I ran 2 binomial generalized linear models with a link logit function. To analyze weirdness, we used the proportion of weird behaviors as the response variable. So then it actually, for a while, gets a little bit normal,
Technical.
but then it comes back. I have to admit, these birds were weird. I mean, the woodpecker was hopping around on a tree, smashing its bill into the wood. The parrot had a really big bill and was really noisy. And the penguin looked more like a fish. It was swimming around and diving underwater. And so then the discussion then ends with, this is the first study that I am aware of to attempt to quantify the deal with birds. This study has implications for climate change research. And then finally, from the acknowledgments, we thank Big Bird from Sesame Street for comments on the manuscript. So,
and how many journals was it published in?
Yeah, good question. Good question. This was the Scientific Journal of Research and Reviews. So I am definitely going to be publishing there from now on.
Yeah, the beginning, the intro sounded like something out of my 6-year-old kindergarten science notebook, which he started with. What's up with birds? Like I can completely see that happening. Yeah,
it's scientific research written by Jerry Seinfeld. What is the deal with birds?
I'm just gonna say something right now, though, is that I would like to make a goal that in the course of the rest of my career, I would like to publish a paper titled "What's the Deal With?" and then an actual health topic that I study. And I want to do it. I'm stating it here. Hold me at my retirement party. You're gonna have to come.
Let's do it together. The 3 of us are now going to write a paper.
What's the deal?
What is the deal with epidemiology?
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, thanks. Oh, I have an interesting one, and stop me if you've heard this one before. This is a paper that was written and published in the Journal of Archaeological Science.
Ooh, I like this. I like that as a start.
It has to do with feces.
Excellent.
Which was one of the subtopics of my doctoral dissertation, so that in my past life I spent a lot of time thinking along these lines. And so there has been some archaeological evidence to suggest that early humans used frozen feces to make tools in Arctic communities. And so there's researchers who study this, like kind of creation of tools, and like it makes sense,
like
right?
Clay,
Right. Is it like clay? And what, if it's frozen, could you sculpt it into something useful, right? And so this team of researchers at Kent State decided to see if they could freeze poop and turn it into a usable knife, which I thought was just like the coolest, craziest thing to do. And so what they did is I think they did it themselves, that they simulated an Arctic diet that might be what one would expect of early humans living in the Arctic. So it was kind of high protein, high fat diet. They collected their feces, they froze it, and then they sculpted it into a knife. And in the article, there's actually pictures of this device that they had created. But unfortunately, they found it did not cut meat. It was not firm enough to cut the meat. And actually, the quote from the article was, "It left streaks on the meat."
Yeah,
so it did not work. And so they were saying that was evidence of, against the hypothesis that early humans were using our own feces as tools, and that they did not withstand even kind of the level of, in terms of using force, they didn't withstand enough force or the kind of body warmth that would be required to hold a tool to do something vigorous with it. But I was intrigued.
I guess
by
I'm
the experiment.
relieved to hear this, of course. At least
well, it would have opened up the door to other
circles.
Problems, right? Yeah.
Wow, that is interesting. I'm glad someone is studying these things personally.
Yes, I am too. But it could have opened up the door for other kinds of, cross-contamination of food if we'd continued that practice into later years, if we're cutting our meat with our own feces.
It doesn't seem like a good long-term strategy, does it?
It does not seem like a good long-term strategy. I agree. I agree.
Yeah, so this is one of those silver linings in our current crisis. You may have read about a couple of middle-aged pandas at a zoo in Hong Kong. So Ying Ying and Lily have been residents at the Ocean Park Zoo since 2007. And although they live together, there hasn't been a lot of romance between Ying Ying and Lily. And up until very recently, I think it was the 26th of January, there were on most days visitors at the zoo. But they noticed that after the zoo closed, Ying Ying and Lily started spending some more time together. And sure enough, after 2 months of being alone together, it says the couple have recently shown signs they were in the mood for love.
Whoa!
Oh my gosh.
Yep. And it happened. It happened. And now some signs point to Lily being pregnant.
Wow.
The other thing I thought that was interesting about this article is apparently, I did not know this, but apparently pandas have a reputation for having a low sex drive, but really that's all based on captive pandas. We don't really know what if pandas are more frisky in the wild.
Love the word
but it
frisky.
Seems like they may just be modest.
Well,
that seems to be what's going on here.
It kind of makes sense, right? I mean,
it does.
Absolutely.
Finally had some privacy.
Yeah.
My, oh my. Well, that is good news indeed.
Yeah, animals are thriving in zoos and such at this time.
Animals are taking over cities, and have you seen I assume you've seen the videos of the penguins wandering around the zoo?
I love that.
Around the aquarium.
So cute.
So cute. So many good things going on.